Right. Welcome everyone to the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, and California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA Reauthorization Working Group. This is the second meeting on the Fix It First and Climate Action Subworking Group topic, where we're seeking your input and active engagement to ensure our collective voice is heard and reflected in the next surface transportation reauthorization bill. So first, I want to make you aware of our non-discrimination policy statement. Caltrans will make every effort to ensure non-discrimination in all of its services, programs, and activities, whether they are federally funded or not, and that services and benefits are fairly distributed to all people, regardless of race, color, or national origin. For more information on Civil Rights Act at Caltrans, please visit our website. The link is there, and we'll put it in the chat for you as well. So we appreciate your attendance today, and we want to thank all of our partners out there who've also worked with us to implement IIJA over the past few years. We'll be starting off today with some opening comments from CalSTA Deputy Secretary of Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination, Darwin Musavi, on the recent release of the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI 2.0. And then we're going to hear from our subject matter experts, then to set some background for the discussion that we have today. And lastly, we'll be opening up for that discussion from the group to hear from you on your issues and concerns that you'd like to put forward to support our shared goals for maintaining transportation infrastructure and climate action in the state. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Darwin.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that introduction, and thank you, everyone, for having me and giving me this opportunity to speak with you all today. I appreciate you all joining our webinar, and looking forward to hearing from you all and your input on the presentations and having a discussion with you all today. So just wanted to open up this meeting by giving folks a update on our Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, also known as CAPTI 2.0. For those of you who may not be familiar, this is an effort that was born out of executive orders the governor put out back in 2019. We have since worked to implement our Climate Action Plan and have now released an update to the Climate Action Plan that came out in February, just last month. Really excited for this update. This plan, for context, essentially provides us with a framework for how to approach and prioritize discretionary transportation grant dollars here in the state to help meet our climate change goals. With this update, we're committing to a whole new set of 14 new actions to implement the existing framework to further reduce emissions and help address climate change outcomes here in California. So, in the context of this conversation on reauthorization, just wanted to make sure folks are aware of our update and to say that we remain committed to the implementation of CAPTI and believe that it's a great, continues to be a good starting place for conversation on kind of our vision around climate here in the state as it ties to discretionary transportation spending, and a good framework for conversations on reauthorization as it ties to climate goals. So looking forward to the discussion here today, and happy to take any particular questions on CAPTI and our overall frame as we look to implement the Climate Action Plan framework with this new set of actions, and also look to bring this into the conversation here on reauthorization as we move forward. So thank you, Andrew, for the opportunity to provide those comments.
Darwin. And do we have any comments in the chat, any hands? If we can, I'm not able to see that from my angle here sharing the screen. So if we do have any, we'll stop for that first.
We don't have any hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Don't have anything in the chat either.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to briefly review some of the background information that we've provided for these working groups before we get to our presentations after this. So in case you weren't able to attend our prior meetings, this is the background we provided in those. In December 2021, Caltrans and CalSTA convened a working group to coordinate efforts on IIJA implementation. We've had ongoing meetings throughout 2022 and into 2023 there, to inform many aspects of our decision making on how to administer those federal programs and allocate funds as a state. We also formed individual subworking groups to cover a variety of topics then that we felt were important to our stakeholders across California, and that's the structure we've carried forward here today. You'll see on this slide our structure for subtopics and the comparison that we had before with our IIJA implementation to today's subworking groups. The structure is intended to produce actionable outcomes by reducing silos, focusing our conversations, and aligning with CalSTA and Caltrans' core 4 priorities of safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity in our communities. So please note, we also recently added an additional topic for tribal transportation based on the feedback from our tribal partners that we'll also be carrying out forward from here. And then as a reminder, here's what we've showed before, our expected outcomes, goals, and possible products from this working group. The most critical thing here is that all voices are heard and recognized, and that we decide by consensus to make decisions that benefit the entire transportation system in the state of California. So you'll see possible products from this will be consensus principles documents, maybe advocacy plans, draft legislation or regulations, white papers or research topics, and we'll be putting those out as we work through these working groups for public comment for a period of time after we have some written, actionable outcomes that we're looking for here. And then you'll see here our timeline for this year and going into 2026 on this slide. We are working backwards from the expiration of the Act in September 2026 to prepare for our advocacy. And we're looking to be ready to come to the table with asks starting in the middle of next year or possibly this year in order to be part of that discussion at the federal level. So your feedback here is very important to us to inform those federal advocacy goals for the state. So with that, we're going to start off our discussion here with a couple brief presentations from Caltrans subject matter experts to set up some background on these 2 critical topics here, management of the state-owned transportation system and the local highway bridge program. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Mike Johnson and then Andy Chow after that.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to hopefully kind of pique everybody's interest, spur a little conversation and discussion about Fix It First and climate in the context of the state highway transportation system. Next slide. So when you think about the state highway system, well, I say state highway system, state infrastructure, it's bigger than the highway system because now we have a growing bike and ped infrastructure, and we're sort of expanding our conventional thinking on sort of what the state highway system is. But when I use that term, I'm really talking about all the state-owned transportation assets. So if I slip up, okay, and say highway system, I'm really meaning everything that we do. And we, just to kind of level set everybody, I mean, the Caltrans is responsible for maintaining about almost 51,000 lane miles of pavement. We've got a little over 13,000 bridges and tunnels that we have to maintain. Over 200,000 culverts and drainage system elements that keep the system free of water or unplanned water. And then we have a large network of traffic signals and ramp meters and changeable message signs that we call transportation management system elements. So there's a little over 20,000 of those. So these are really, what we call maybe the backbone of the vehicle transportation system. Next slide. But when we think about transportation needs, and as I was preparing for this and thinking about what do we need to think about for reauthorization, you can really think about transportation needs in 5 buckets. And this isn't really just specific to the state highway system. This is somewhat generic. This could be any state, any country, any local agency. We have, all of the physical assets that represent the transportation system. So this is roadway segments and bridges and, the 4 I just talked about, as well as sidewalks and bike lanes and buildings. So a lot of people are surprised to find out that, that Caltrans has to manage almost 600 buildings with our transportation funding. things like roadside rests and overhead signs and lighting and signage and guardrail and everything else that makes up a transportation system. There are these physical assets, and these physical assets deteriorate over time, and they require maintenance and rehabilitation and at some point renewal. And then in a separate category, we have, what I would call operational deficiencies. So these are things like safety. So a safety need could exist almost on any one of those physical assets that I just talked about. We have congestion mitigation needs. We have goods movement need. We have system damage. So these are all things that are, while they're not specific assets, they are things that crop up and require investment and attention. We have environmental initiatives, certainly at the project level, like all of you, whenever we do a project, we have environmental mitigation that we have to do at the project level. But then at the programmatic level, we have things like stormwater mitigation, our fish and wildlife programs, and others that we're doing in the environmental space. Arguably you could, and some of these are hard to put in one bucket or another. I could put in environmental, also things like, expanding our bike and ped infrastructure, right? We're doing that in part, for modal choice, but it also has a side benefit of reducing emission. Installing electric vehicle charging is another one that, ultimately becomes a piece of physical infrastructure that you're managing. But a lot of times the impetus to do it is to reduce emissions in the environment. So we've got this environmental bucket. Then we've got another bucket, which is vulnerabilities. So these are things like, earthquake retrofit needs or seismic needs. Bridge scour, which is, the erosion of the supports that bridges are founded on. This is a serious vulnerability that we have to deal with for any bridge owner, whether it's Caltrans or anyone else. A lot of people are surprised to learn that bridge scour is the #1 cause of bridge collapse in the world. This is not a California thing or a United States thing. This is anywhere. Bridge scour is the #1 thing that causes bridges to collapse. So it's serious business. Then getting more into the climate space, we have to think about coastal erosion. In California, we have sections of US 101 in the north part of the state and Highway 1 in the, from the mid part of California all the way down south that has portions that are at threat to coastal erosion and slides that are associated with coastal erosion. Think Highway 1 in the Big Sur coast, as sort of the quintessential example of what I'm talking about there. Then we have things like sea level rise, which is, we're still, I think, in the early stages of experiencing sea level rise. But if the models, are realized, and the ocean levels rise from melting ice due to climate change and global warming, there are portions of the transportation system that will be more threatened. Then we have wildfire. So wildfire is, another thing that, we've had wildfires forever, but it seems like wildfires are coming more frequently and with greater impact. There's work that we do with respect to wildfire to prevent them by controlling roadside vegetation and cutting back heavy fuels in the vicinity of transportation systems to prevent a big wildfire. And then if in the event that a wildfire occurs, we certainly have response activities that we have to take. But then there's also a role for the transportation system to evacuate people from wildfire-prone areas, as well as deliver emergency services into wildfire areas. So you've got sort of both directions of movement there, and the transportation system, in some cases, can become a lifeline for people to get out. And then overall system resiliency, we have other things like drought and heat and Other things that storms, localized flooding, and there's a need to make the system more resilient to those threats. We talked a little bit about coastal erosion, but we also have local erosion due to increased precipitation causing rivers and creeks and things to change where they flow. And as they change where they flow, sometimes they can hit transportation infrastructure head on, causing erosion, collapse. We saw some of that on I-10 not that long ago, for example. And then we have slides, and sometimes the slides are not associated with coastal environments. So we currently have a section of Route 140. If you're ever on the way to Yosemite, we have one directional traffic on Route 140 because we had a mountain slide down and close Route 140. And as we're trying to fix that particular section around 140, just last week we had another slide about a mile up the road on 140 that buried Route 140 under rock. And so this is not coastal driven. This is, just erosion and slides that are caused by, in part or exacerbated by, precipitation levels that we're seeing that are growing from what they've historically been. And then, of course, we have needs for expansion. So these are new assets, or, recently in California, it is part of our goal to have more modal choice. What can we do to facilitate transit service? What can we do to facilitate rail service? So, you start getting into doing things that you haven't historically done, and this all creates needs that we have to think about as transportation managers. Next slide. So, when we think about the state highway system, particularly, it's predominantly funded through the State Highway Operation Protection Program, or SHOP, as well as our maintenance programs. And I put this up there to show that, there is a distribution of investments. This is out of our draft state highway system management plan, to show that a portion of funding is getting distributed to all of these different things that I talked about. Next slide. So kind of getting back, to the theme of today, which is fix it first and climate. These two graphs on the left is showing kind of our core assets, the bridge, pavement, culvert and drainage, and transportation management system elements. You can see, our expenditure level going back predating SB1. So I'd leave the 2015 in there to remind people where our investment levels were before we had the gas tax versus where we are now with the gas tax. And, to some degree with IIJA. And, it's, we had definitely a gap up with the passage of SB1. And then, we've been, sort of up and down depending on the cost of goods and needs of the system. But, we're trending, somewhere around the $30 to $32 billion mark of late. And that's the annual, that's the 10-year cost. So take 1/10 of that for an annual cost. And then on the right graph is showing sort of where we are in that same time space with our climate investments. And you could see, the need here is growing dramatically. And these two things are coming from the same pots of available funding sources. So they are effectively competing against each other. Next slide. Another phenomenon that we have on the state highway system, and I'm sure this is true on the local transportation system as well, is that we are seeing more damage to the system. Rather, this is unprecedented snowfall, unprecedented rainfall, heat, fires, coastal erosion, sea level rise, local flooding, all of the above. I mean, we are spending approximately about 20% of all SHOP funding on an annual basis is going to fix damage now. in excess of $1 billion a year on average for the state highway system. Next slide. So that kind of brings us to fix it first. So, we've heard this term a lot, and this is my own definition. I don't know, there may be some published definitions. I'm not real sure, but it's really more of philosophy than it is, a description or a definition. And the philosophy really says, to take care of what you already have before you grow systems and expand services. In other words, you need to make sure that we can maintain, rehabilitate, and renew what we already own before we start growing the system. Because if you grow the system, you could end up, you could end up in an unsustainable place where you can't take care of what you grew or what you had before. And so the philosophy is really just, look at what it takes to maintain what you have. And this is in the most generic sense. So when we look at fix it first, that includes existing bike and ped infrastructure as well as highway infrastructure. So before we build new bike and ped facilities, let's make sure we can, afford to keep the ones that we have in a state of good repair and safe. Next slide. And so this fix it first philosophy has policy linkages. So, Darwin mentioned CAPTI, which was, just finalized last week. And there's, lots of different principles, and they're all sort of listed here on the slide. But I highlighted in the red box up there, within a fix it first approach and through existing funding frameworks, then we're going to try to do all these things, right? And so, we're trying to balance all of this and do many things at one time, but there is, a direct alignment with, if you will, between fix it first and CAPTI. In fact, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg, but I mean, the way this is structured, it's, we don't want to do any of these things that are here if we can't sustain them. And that's really what fix it first is all about. Next slide. So I guess, what I'm trying to do to seed the conversation here as we think about reauthorization is to get people to understand and appreciate that there are a lot of competing things that we're trying to do at the same time. And, my role in asset management is really, we have established and we, work this framework that evaluates all these competing needs so that we can make objective investment decisions. And it's, it's very fluid. It changes with policy change. It changes with funding changes. It changes with climate. It changes with, deteriorating infrastructure and other things. But again, coming back to what is Fix It First all about? I mean, we estimate that we have a $450 billion investment in physical assets on the state highway system, including bike and ped. So I did what I said I wouldn't do, use the word highway. But the state's transportation system is a $450+ billion investment, and we need to maintain that investment in our Fix It First program. At the same time, climate-related damage is increasing. We showed that it's 20% of all money. And there's, in addition to addressing the damage, we are also having to try to get proactive and get out in front of that by building in resiliency in our system so that it doesn't get as damaged. And I often describe this as, if you had a leak in your roof and water's dripping in your house, you may go get a bucket to catch the water so it doesn't damage your flooring. That's what we do with our damage. That's 20% of our money. But we need to put the bucket out there, and we also need to get up on the roof and stop the water from coming in. And some of these resiliency projects are prohibitively expensive. We've got a couple of them that, are measured in multiple billions of dollars, if not tens and 20s of billions of dollars. So all of that is in a context when you look at the needs that we have for the state highway system. there's about a $4 billion annual shortfall to do everything that we think should be done relative to the amount of funding that we have. So to kind of hopefully, prime the pumps a little bit and get some interaction here with the group, I started to think, well, I chair an AASHTO committee, a nationwide committee for asset management. What are the things that we're talking about? What are the things that I see firsthand? And, things that we could think about for consensus principles. And, one is that I think we need to get federal funding for maintenance and rehabilitation of existing infrastructure, i.e. our fix it first. So we need to make sure that federal highway trust funds remain solvent and, that we're good to go there. And then we need funding to reduce climate impacts and to make the system more resilient. We saw that in the last administration. We're not sure exactly what we're going to see with reauthorization in the new administration. But regardless of what we see at the federal level, we certainly know that these impacts are real and we're feeling them right now. And then, we really need to start transitioning and thinking about a long-term solution for solvency of transportation funding. The federal funding, when we talk about reauthorization, is still, is geared towards, tax on the sale of gasoline primarily and diesel. As we're moving people away from internal combustion engines into higher, mileage vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, or we get them out of their cars altogether and they bike or walk or transit or train. We are in fact reducing our available transportation funding in the process. So I don't know, these are just my thoughts just to kind of hopefully spur conversation. And with that, Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mike. So we'll pause for a moment here. I think I did see at least one item come up in the chat and see if there's any specific questions for Mike right now, or any other any other things, any comments from folks.
Sorry, there are a couple of things in the chat. First, just being a comment, it reads, really appreciate the good work on CapTie and the focus on Fix It First. In practice, the SB1 programs seem to predominantly fund expansion or capacity increasing transit projects, not state of good repair projects, which are needed to sustain safe and reliable transit service and keep and grow transit ridership. And then the following thing in the chat is a question. It reads, concrete can be very resilient against climate warming issues, but can also be very unsustainable if not designed to be lower CO2. How are we going to make sure we are using the most sustainable mixes? Will there be funding for pilot projects on low CO2 concrete? Caltrans does a good job at this right now, but can take another leap in promoting these types of concrete.
Yeah, so, getting into sort of the materials that we use for transportation and how can we be better in the material selection, in this context related to concrete. Concrete itself requires a lot of mining. It requires a lot of processing of the cement that goes into concrete and, mining of the aggregate and crushing the aggregate, hauling it to the site, placing it, all of that. So, you really have to sort of look at the totality of the emissions associated with the particular material. The department does have programs that look at various different ways we can mix not only concrete but asphalt that would be less impactful on the environment from an emissions standpoint. So those are ongoing programs. And then, there's other things that we do as well, like as we're experiencing damage or putting out new things, we're putting out more resilient material. So it may be subtle, but we're starting to convert over all of our guardrail and signs from wooden posts to metal posts in wildfire prone areas. So we're again reducing the fuels and trying to make the infrastructure improvement more resilient to a potential fire. So that's just a couple examples of things we're doing in that space.
And I am aware that we did get some grants under those pilot programs for, I think specifically for low carbon materials. I've talked with the materials folks about that before, and so that may be one angle on our future advocacy if there's desire to maintain those funding streams, increase them. We also have you see ITS folks and others in the research area that get their own funding for those kinds of programs. So that's definitely something we can consider as part of our platform for advocacy. So thank you. And then I think we had a hand also.
We don't have any hands up right now.
Okay. Oh, is it? There we go.
Oh, we do.
Oh, someone just changed their mind. See, Priya with Bard has their hand up. I will I will unmute.
Thank you.
About or observation rather about transit state of good repair, and it is something that we're really challenged with is funding, is identifying enough funding for state of good repair to maintain our aging transit systems in a good state and to deliver reliable and safe service as a result. And what we've seen through SB1 is really this focus on expansion and capacity increasing transit projects. So just curious how and I know there's the whole CARB analysis, the benefit cost analysis that's required for TIRCP, et cetera. Just wondering how the state could think about this differently and to really facilitate the funding of state of good repair projects. And then also in the context of IIJA, whether there's an opportunity to increase, we would really advocate for the increase of federal formula funding for improvements to existing infrastructure as well in that area.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a response other than, certainly, when we talk about fix it first, like I said, that applies to any physical infrastructure that's out there, whether it's rail, highway, bike ped, whatever. And I think as we think about that from a consensus principles of reauthorization, I think we should adopt that broader definition, meaning everything. And I don't know anybody anywhere in the United States or frankly the world in my work that says we have all the money we need for transportation. Like it just never happens. And so, but I think we should advocate for it. I'm in complete agreement with you.
If I could just offer one other thing that might be controversial, but I know that the Safe Streets and Roads for All program has been, they haven't allocated all of the funding that has been authorized through that program. And they authorized, through the IIJA, a huge amount of funding. And of course, I'm a proponent of safe streets and roads. I'm not suggesting that that's not an important goal, but I'm wondering if there's really enough uses for the amount of funding that was allocated or appropriated through the IIJA, and whether it might be worth considering diverting some of that funding to other important needs.
I think it's definitely worth looking at. Our needs are significant. We can't really afford to have resources that are being unutilized. So I think we could look at that as a generic statement across all programs, that if we have the available funding, but we're not leveraging it, we ought to think about how we can either leverage it or suggest changes to get it in programs that would be easier for us to leverage.
Yeah, that's certainly one thing we're here to do, is to think about the process by which we get our funding and how to be most efficient with that. But I do also want to say, Darwin, I don't know if you wanted to speak at all, if you had to comment on that question.
Yeah, I just wanted to generally chime into this discussion to say, I really appreciate you raising the state of good repair question. I think a couple of things come to my mind, which is much like we see on the state highway side, really looking for and advocating for flexibility in how those funds and federal funds can be used on the transit side. It seems like a good place to really start doing a little bit more there. And then I know within the state context with TRCP and all the dollars we have here, the Transit Transformation Task Force that we're running here at CalSTA has been taking a critical look at, highest and best use of our investments and dollars, the operational needs the transit agencies have, the state of good repair needs, as well as all the goals for, major expansion we need to be able to meet our climate goals that transit is a key and critical part of. So I just wanted to say that even outside of the federal kind of reauthorization conversation, I know a lot of those conversations are happening here in terms of kind of state resources as well. I think one thing I would say more generally is that to the point for kind of the Safe Streets for All program is that I would caution an approach where we are going after kind of other specific well-needed or much-needed resources. I would push back and say that I think that we have a major need for bicycle and pedestrian and general safety improvements in the state and across the country as well. Making sure that those resources are being used in a way that, for example, support transit agencies and first last mile improvement seems like something very well worth fighting for. But I think the moment we get into kind of a tit for tat, if you will, across various funding sources like that, we're not doing any of our needs a service to do that. So, but certainly supportive of more broader advocacy around all of the needs that you raised.
And we will have a further discussion specifically on transit and rail and on federal funding generally, where we want to get into these issues more. So, I want to give us enough time to get through Andy's stuff as well. But if you have any other comments on that, we can always have a further discussion as well with you.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. So with that, I do want to get back to Andy here and make sure we can get through some more. Just to pivot, we want to talk specifically about bridges here because we have heard, a lot from those programs and the needs there, especially from a local perspective. So I will turn it over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Morning, everyone. My name is Andy Chow. I work at Caltrans Division of Local Assistance in the Office of Federal Programs. I am actually one of the 3 local HBP or Highway Bridge Program managers there. So first, thank you for inviting me here to share some information with you all about our program. Throughout my presentation today, you'll hear me use the acronym HBP. Just know HBP refers to the Local Highway Bridge Program. Our funds are intended for local agencies to address their structural deficiencies on local bridges. So next slide, please. Just an overview of the presentation today. Just a real quick brief introduction on the Local Highway Bridge Program and our HBP guidelines. I'll kind of go into a little detail about what qualifies for HBP funding and then just the eligibility aspects for our program. I'm going to spend a little time talking about the IIJA and the funding levels that we got from that act. And then I will close with any questions you may have. So next slide, please. Yeah, so first and foremost, the Local Highway Bridge Program was created to help administer federal funds that's aimed towards local agency highway bridges. Caltrans here, we actually administer the program on behalf of the local regions. It was actually requested by the local regions. The Local Highway Bridge Program is a structural safety program, but then I want to emphasize structural safety. It's to help local agencies maintain their highway bridges in good or fair condition. The intent of the program is to remove structural deficiencies from existing bridges to keep the traveling public safe. The program doesn't pay to build new bridges or new roads, so kind of on theme with the Fix It First that Michael B. Johnson was talking about earlier. The funding for our program does come through the federal government through the Transportation Acts. Historically, the funding has come through formula funding. Like many other federal programs out there, the HBP, we do have a local match requirement that goes with the federal funding. This usually comes in the form of local funds, and the percentage of local match typically ranges from 20% to 11.47%. Again, that's 20% to 11.47%. And the range of that just depends on the functional classification of the roadway facility. Side note, in addition to our HPP, there is a sister program that we work pretty closely with. That's the Local Bridge Seismic Retrofit Program. That seismic retrofit program utilizes the Prop 1B bonds as the local match. So next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. To understand why our HPP or our program exists, it's important first to understand the local assets and their needs. But taking a step back, the federal government does have requirements and definitions on what they deem a bridge is and what is eligible for federal funding. These bridges fall into what they call the National Bridge Inventory, or NBI for short. So in California, there's over 25,000 NBI bridges. About half of those are locally owned. There is a federal mandate that these bridges are inspected on a regular schedule. Typically, that's about every 2 years. And there is a standardized method of inspecting and reporting. In California, the majority of local bridges are inspected by Caltrans Structured Maintenance and Investigations. So if you are a local agency and you own any NBI bridge or bridges, you should be receiving these inspection reports on a regular basis from our Caltrans Maintenance Division. The reason I bring that up is because it's critical to understand these requirements, because the outcome of those inspections is a bridge inspection report, and that really is what helps determine the eligibility for our projects in our program. One important note is that not all NBI bridges are highway bridges, meaning public bridges or public roads open to traveling public and vehicles. Some examples are pedestrian bridges or transit bridges. Such bridges aren't eligible under the local highway bridge program. There are other programs potentially aimed for these types of projects. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned just now, there is a standardized way for inspecting and reporting. These result in the bridge inspection reports. So these documents, they really document the condition of the bridge components. They identify any deficiencies on the bridge, and they also provide work recommendations to the local agencies. These reports, again, are how the Highway Bridge Program determines the eligible scope of a project. In addition to the inspections that we pay for, other eligible scopes under the HBP, they include preventive maintenance, scour countermeasure projects, replacement, seismic retrofit, rehabilitation, and paint. The eligibility criteria in our program, they're all documented and they can be found in our Caltrans Local Assistance Program Guidelines, Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is our HBP guidelines. The document there also describes how to apply for a project with the local HBP as well. One thing I do want to point out, it's important to note that the program pays for the most cost-effective structural solution to address any structural deficiencies on the bridge. I bring this up because one of the common scenarios that the program encounters is the local agency often wants to go above and beyond what we see as the most cost-effective solution. For example, the bridge inspection reports might say that only minor deck repair or minor rehabilitation is necessary, but the local agency would like to pursue a bridge replacement project instead. In these situations, the program will work with the local agencies to identify the dollar amount associated with the most cost-effective solution, and then the cost beyond that will be what we call non-participating, and that will be 100% locally funded or funded by some other program. Reason for this policy of financial constraint or fiscal constraint is so that the program can really try to address all the needs of the state. Next slide, please. So as we know, IIJA is our current Transportation Act. The IIJA has provided much needed funding to the HBP through 2 ways. We have what we call our core apportionment funding. That's kind of really our formula funding, in other words. And then IIJA also brought in a new program called the Bridge Formula program. So core apportionment has always been we call our standard for bridge funding in past acts. The BFP, again, the Bridge Formula Program, is what was introduced by IIJA. When IIJA was introduced and the Bridge Formula Program was introduced, there was an agreement made amongst the California regions through IIJA workshops, discussions to administer the local share of the Bridge Formula Program funds through the existing local highway bridge program and maintain it through our existing policy. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the breakdown of the approximate annual funding to the HBP under IIJA. The amounts are separated into what we call on federal aid and off federal aid systems because different types of money in the Transportation Act, they can only go toward different types of projects. For example, if you have money from the Transportation Act that's targeted for off federal aid system projects, we can't use that money towards an on federal aid project. On and off federal aid system is based on the functional classification in the facility. It's not to be confused with the state highway system. That's completely different. And it's not to be confused with the NHS or the national highway system either. In short, off federal aid system projects are essentially bridges on public roads that are classified as local roads, whether it's rural or urban, and rural minor collectors. Anything above that functional classification is determined as an on federal aid system. So next slide, please. So the local highway bridge program, we manage it as a 15-year program, meaning we anticipate the demands in our program for 15 years based on projects we have and applications we receive. And then we also anticipate the capacity that the program will receive in the next 15 years. There is a delicate balance of understanding the projects in the program, where they are in their project delivery schedule to determine the demand of each year. The HPP, if you haven't heard already, before IIJA, we were very, very over-constrained. The reason for that is because the local highway bridge program has not received an increase in funding capacity since before MAP 21. And obviously the demands for costs have also gone up since then. With the introduction of the bridge formula program that was a part of IIJA, that's where the HPP saw the big boost in funding increase. And this was, again, much needed relief to the program. So taking a step back, so what do we see or what have we done with the money so far from IIJA and IIJA, or IIJA and the Bridge Formula Program? So taking a step back to 2018, 2018, before IIJA was signed, we had not approved or accepted any new projects in 2018. So when IIJA was finally signed and we saw the funding capacity increase, we were finally able to accept new projects, and that happened in 2022. These are bridges that are in poor condition. They, some of them are the scour projects that Michael V. Johnson was mentioning earlier. So there's definitely projects that need to be addressed. Furthermore, there were projects in the program back in 2020 that we could not give money to, and they wanted to start construction. So the increase of funding finally allowed us to get those projects to construction. During that time in the 2020-2021 era, a lot of local agencies, they opted to use their own local funds to progress their project with the intent to be reimbursed later. So a lot of local agencies did do that. They utilized a method of what we call local advanced construction. Essentially, they're fronting the cost and with the expectation that HPP would pay back that cost later. So IIJA, with the increase in funding, they allowed us to do that. So essentially, in a way, you can call it paying back debt. Right now, there is no certainty that the Bridge Formula Program will remain after IIJA. It is anticipated that the funding levels will probably return back to only the core portion, but that's up to what happens in the next Transportation Act. So next slide, please. So I will close with this slide and kind of relate it to the topic of reauthorization. In 2020, the local HPP, we worked with our regional partners to produce a report called the California Local Bridge Needs Assessment Report. The goal of this report was to project the condition of the entire local inventory, just to say, hey, based on hypothetical funding levels, would we be able to address our needs, and what would that look like? It was clear that the condition of the local bridges continued to deteriorate much faster than what we could keep up with. And again, the level of funding for the HPP was not keeping up. So definitely not keeping up with the demand. The assessment report, they analyzed local inventory and identified the various types of scopes necessary to address the structural issues of the poor condition bridges. Essentially, the percent of poor condition bridges that are out there right now measured by deck area for the entire local asset inventory was 12%. In the 2020 report, what they saw was that if we maintained a funding level of $300 million per year, that was consistent with just about what we got during FAST Act, the percent poor would climb to 50% in the next 20 years. So again, I'll say that again. Had we not gotten BFP and had the local HPP funding level been maintained at just about $300 million, the 12% poor for the entire local inventory would have climbed to 50% poor in the next 20 years. To frame it a different way, the report estimated that the funding levels needed would be $800 million a year just to maintain the current state of repair or disrepair over time. Again, we would need $800 million a year to maintain that 12% poor across the entire inventory over time. That being said, this is all based on the 2020 values. We are in the works of developing a new report. We do suspect it will come out in the next year or two, and once that's out, we'll have revised numbers. But again, just to kind of close out, there is a need for funding, obviously, for California local bridges, DLA and local assistance. We have been encouraging local owners and MPOs to leverage whatever they can to fight for more funding for the local HPP, whether that comes in the form of an increase in formula funding or another program that's similar to the Bridge Formula program that came with IIJA that's to come. And with that, I will turn it over back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andy. And obviously that's exactly why we're here today, to highlight that there is that need. We want to hear from you all on how you want us to proceed with our advocacy. So I will turn it to Nicole now. And if there are specific questions, you can always put those in the chat for Andy.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to chime in here for a few minutes. Thank you, Andy and Mike, for your informative presentations. They're really helpful to this group and to these discussions. I wanted to mention one thing that I think is notable for discussion purposes and also for moving forward with this group, and that's the Competitive Bridge Investment Program. So, the competitive nature of this program still leaves many of us struggling to secure funding. And the competitive grant application process and award process has also been very, very taxing and just very challenging. So rhetorically speaking, would shifting more resources to formula-based allocations, kind of similar to what Andy was just talking about with the Bridge Formula program, would that create a more reliable and equitable funding mechanism for bridge infrastructure? I think that's definitely something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward about whether or not we want this group to advocate for that. And it's definitely going to be a topic that our transportation funding subworking group will discuss on a much larger scale along with the other competitive grant programs. So with that, we'd appreciate your feedback and questions. Thank you.
So again, if you want to raise your hand, we can help to get you unmuted if you have any questions for the group here, or you can put that in the chat and our team here will be monitoring that.
It looks like we have one hand raised. Woodrow, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Well, this is Woodrow Deloria with the El Dorado County Transportation Commission. Appreciate the opportunity just to hear, what the group is thinking as far as advocacy. I think the concept of less competitive based grant programs and more of a formula based approach is what I'm seeing the writing to be on the wall as far as the new administration. They've already suspended the Protect program and expect to see more of that. So absolutely want to advocate for formula-based funding. I would just ask that, there may be some opportunities for a new approach to the formula-based allocations to smaller rural areas in California, so that we don't have to then go and compete within the state for those funds. That would be very, very helpful, especially for the fix it first type of programs. Secondly, just advocating to keep projects moving forward. Keep those projects that are under construction or near to construction moving forward so that we don't have to delay them and have additional costs come up and all of that. So thanks everybody for your time. That's all I have.
Well, thank you. And I do think that's one of the things we've been thinking here as a group is we also don't want the state to be competing against our own local governments and regional entities as well. So that doesn't feel like a great way. A race to the bottom of us all competing against each other is not necessarily always the best way to do things. So appreciate that. Do we have any other hands or chats there?
I don't have anything in the chat right now.
Okay. And obviously, this won't be the only time to speak to us. So we're happy to take your comments offline. We're happy to have further discussions as well. And we will also be putting up some links here to the website as we go. I did see another chat come in.
Yes, there is one now. To Nicole's comment, in light of the current political makeup in DC, it seems unlikely that California will fare well in competitive grants. Well, I guess it's a comment, not a question.
Yeah, we have been tracking that. We're keeping a close look at how much we're receiving in grants. I believe, as far as we're aware at the moment, California is still outperforming if it was just population-based formulas. But the team here may know more about that. I'm not as familiar with the discretionary grant funding we've been awarded.
We'd say we were doing quite well. You've been punching above our weight a little bit up until the end of the year, calendar year.
So that is something we will be monitoring closely as we go forward. All right, any other last questions? Mike, go ahead.
Not a question, but a comment. When we think about the discretionary grant programs, and this, we see this in California, but we see it across the nation as well. That putting these grant proposals forward are really, really expensive. Many agencies are hiring consultants and paying considerable amounts of money to put these applications in. And when you think about it, even if we punch above our weight, we're going to be unsuccessful 85 to 90% of the time. And that just seems like an incredible inefficiency to me. And I think that should be woven into, if we're gonna call for more formula funding, part of it should be that it's more efficient. Right, you know what you have. It's not a guessing game. You can plan for it. And I just think we would get considerably better outcomes, both state and local, everybody, if we knew what we had, it wasn't a game, and we didn't have to spend a ton of money that results in nothing.
Yeah, if there's any other thoughts on that, happy to take that as well.
Just one comment in the chat. I completely agree with Mike on the cost associated with grant development. Small agencies can't compete against large regional agencies with significant resources.
Yeah, we're definitely aware of that. And so, like I said, we'll be hosting some further discussions more targeted about funding issues generally in federal funding, and a couple other subtopics that we still have yet to get together and talk about on active transportation and safety, transit and rail, equity and workforce development, particularly the consideration about rural, thoughts as well would be welcome in that equity discussion. And so we do want to hear from you all on that. So with that, if we don't have any other further questions, we're getting to noon here. I will put up our contact information here. The IIJA reauthorization website is where we're hosting all of this information from these meetings. So if you go there as soon as we can, we'll get the meeting information up, the PowerPoints and all that. You can refer back to that for all of the materials here. Hopefully you're all aware of the build.ca.gov website where we have all of our information about transportation projects. You may also be aware of our annual policy narratives that we've been putting out from the Office of the Federal Liaison here at Caltrans. We have the 2022, 23, and 24 links up there, and we'll be putting out another one shortly this year. And if you have not already signed up, we have our, well, I gotta change this in here. IIJA biweekly newsletter. We've kind of retooled it a bit in the last update to be more broadly about federal affairs generally in the state. And then our tribal IIJA newsletter that's put out intermittently. You'll have the QR code there to sign up for that if you're not already on the mailing list. And we'll be putting out materials for future meetings through that mailing list. And then you can always reach out to us at federal liaison at dot.ca.gov. And if you want to talk more specifically, arrange for other meetings, we're happy to take that information there. We do have a survey up on the reauthorization site if you want to propose any agenda topics, or if you have other thoughts, you can always go in through that, or you can contact us directly. So happy to take your information however you'd like to. And if there's nothing else, I'll leave it to you, Nicole, to close us out.
Andrew, I did want to chime in one other thing is that if, as you're having your partnership meetings, in your own niches, please reach out to us if you'd like us to attend and have an agenda item to talk about what we're doing here. We would really appreciate just having as many engagement opportunities as we can to get your feedback and to hear really at that, smaller scale, local level, what's really going on that we can carry forward through this process. So please reach out. And with that, just thank you so much again for our panelists today. I appreciated the discussions, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.